So I thought I'd start talking about one of my favorite orchestration topics, and that is the use of the saxophone in the orchestra. And I'm going to make this a multi-part series, go through each of the sizes of saxophone, at least each of the sizes that I have available. We'll look at how they're used in the orchestra. And in this case, not in the band, because it's a very different setup. And then we'll look at how they're used some in combinations and historical scoring. So we're going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to go with the baritone saxophone, the Bari. Right off the bat, this is the baritone saxophone. This is a low B-flat model. This is the model that was used throughout most of the 20th century. Today, almost all baritone saxes are made with a low A. They go 1/2 step lower than this instrument, but by and large, most of the classical orchestral repertoire can be accomplished with a low B-flat Bari. What I'll start off with is a very typical passage. We're going to start off with a little bit of Granger, a Granger orchestral piece. This is Green Bushes. Passage, while not exactly a solo, is a nice accompaniment and melodic figure, and it showcases really the two of the really important registers of the baritone sax, namely the upper register, which you hear at the beginning, and the very bottom, and that does go down to the bottom B flat. Historically, Adolphe Sax envisioned the saxophone family in the low range first. So the first two instruments he made were the bass and the baritone. And these instruments figured prominently in his early advertisements. And as Adolphe saw it, these were needed to bolster the lower end of the woodwind section in the orchestra. At that time, we're dealing with French bassoons and very early models of bass clarinets. By the way, Sax invented, or modernized, not invented, but modernized our bass clarinet. So if you ever hear somebody say, the bass clarinet looks like a saxophone, believe it or not, it's the other way around. The saxophone looks like the bass clarinet. Thank you, Mr. Sax. So the Bari came along pretty early on. It's actually number 2 historically. So what have composers done with it? Well, you could hear something like that in Granger. Surprisingly, the Bari sax has been one of the least used orchestral saxophones. The alto, the tenor, and the soprano have all had considerably more literature written for them. So I had to scrounge around through my library this morning looking for passages to play. And that actually came out of the Orchestral Saxophonist, a book of saxophone excerpts. For some of the other pieces I'll be playing, I'll be going straight from the full score, or from my book, Band Orchestration Volume 2. But the next piece I'd like to look at is really interesting one, and one of my absolute favorite, if not my absolute favorite, saxophone excerpt. And it's from a not very well-known piece by the German composer Karl Amadeus Hartmann. Hartmann was a 20th century composer living middle of the 20th century, 40s, 50s, 60s, into the 70s, and I believe into the 80s. I'm not entirely sure on his dates. Alright, so, got the score in hand, found it, and I'm going to be reading directly from the miniature score here. So, if I make some mistakes, we'll blame my poor eyesight. It's not what it used to be. It was never good, but it's still not what it used to be. So, the baritone saxophone solo from Hartmann's Symphony Number 2. By the way, in this piece, a little bit of scoring information. This is the only part that the baritone sax plays in the entire symphony. It is covered by the third clarinet player. So for this little bit, and it's an unaccompanied solo, the third clarinet player goes over to the Bari sax, and covers this solo. By the way, there are some performances that I've heard where the beginning of this is played on an alto sax and the ending is played on a bassoon, and it does not work. I heard this on the radio a few months back. And it's like, you just lost the magic of the solo by saying, oh, we couldn't get a bari sax to record this piece. So, the bari sax solo. You can see why I really like that solo. It's almost like medieval plain chant. Just this haunting, repetitive, and it's just, I absolutely love how he scores the bari sax there. And I don't think any other instrument could really get that hollow, mysterious sound. Next, I'd like to take a look at a work by the composer Bela Bartok. Yes, Bartok actually had one piece where he scored 4 saxophones, the Wooden Prince. In this piece, he has 2 saxophone players. Saxophone 1 plays alto sax, and sax 2 goes between tenor and baritone. And I'll play a little bit of the baritone part from this piece, and this is an excerpt that can be found in my book. So that's just a little accompaniment passage. Really, it's one of the melodic ideas from it. It's played in octaves with the alto sax. A lot of times, composers will use the baritone sax down low for just, really raucous and rockin' time down there. But like I said, baritone sax has really stayed out of the limelight for orchestral composers, which is a real shame because a lot of people feel that this might be the saxophone most well-suited for inclusion in the orchestra. It blends beautifully, as I hope you can hear, with a string sound, with the low woodwind sound that's already there. A piece that I wanted to show, but I just was not able to find the modern excerpt for it, is Rhapsody in Blue. The revised jazz band version, the original scoring of it, has quite a few bari solos in it. And if I am lucky, I'll be able to get those by the 5th video in this series, where we talk about another member. So that's a little bit on baritone saxophone, its history in the orchestra, as scant as it is. There are a few other pieces. Strauss's Sinfonia Domestica, though that one is scored for a bari in F, which doesn't and didn't exist. Silly Strauss. But there's not a lot out there. But for my ears, and for a lot of people's ears, the bari sax might very well be the saxophone most well suited for orchestral playing. So next time we'll talk about the next size up, the tenor.